It's lovely to see all of you, and happy Week of the Young Child to everyone. What an exciting week it is for those who work in service of young children and their families. I always love this week because it feels like a celebration. And I think after the last 14 months, we certainly need a celebration. Hopefully, next year we're celebrating in person, and much of this is behind us at that point. But we'll see what the future brings. Junlei and I are very excited to be with you today and to think a little bit about what it means to be more than one thing and to find more than one way, especially when we're working in service of children and young people. The work that we do is all in service of what Fred Rogers would call the helpers. I'm most certain that you've heard the quote of look for the helpers that Fred Rogers is so famous and thinking about. And it's actually a quote that comes from his mom, where he asked his mom what he should do when he's afraid. And his mom told him to look for the helpers. You'll always find people helping. But it goes on, and she says that we look for the helpers because when we see people helping, we know there is hope. And we are so grateful for all of the hope that you have given, especially over these last 14 months. And we want to celebrate the hope that you are to so many young children and families. Our work has taken us around the world and in very diverse settings to think about what it means to be a helper for children and youth and for one another. And typically, that work is done together, looking at interactions and bringing educators and helpers together to think about our relationships with others. And we've been very lucky to have done this work in many of the states across the United States, also in China and in Canada. Now, Junlei and I have both been grounded for a bit, and I have confirmed with my mother it's the longest I've ever been grounded. I certainly hope so. It's been a long time. But our work continues just as your work has continued, even though the world has shifted and has changed around us very much in the last year for a number of reasons. But we are just so thankful to be here with you today to think a little bit about this together and think about the power of human connection, even across many different challenges and many uncertainties.
I think what we wanted to have a chance to just share with you is how not only us, but our colleagues and the teachers and social workers and home visitors we work with around the world, how have people been thinking about what it means to maintain and build relationships during a time like ours? I think before the pandemic, as we worked in these different places, what stood out to us is that when it comes to serving children and families, so many of the helper there out there are focusing right on this essential question, no matter what it is that they do, whether they're in everyday professional practice, whether they're designing or directing whole programs, or even when they're developing policies that supports professionals and programs. And it comes down to the question of how does this thing or anything that we do help to encourage, enrich, and empower the human relationships, the human interactions around children, around families, and then as well as around all the people who are out there helping children and helping families. And so the way we've traditionally thought about what does it mean, right, to serve young children regardless of our role, is this kind of a relationship focused vision for how do we engage families and supporting helpers and build communities around them. And in this vision we start with a child, and we wonder what does a child need to learn and grow in a healthy and positive way. Well, the child starts with a family, right? The child needs caregivers in the families or around the families, and the child needs to have these everyday interactions and relationships with people in the family. And of course, many children also turn to helpers outside the family. They are early childhood educators. They're childcare providers, or for some children it might be early intervention and home visitors or family support, and hopefully for all children that includes their healthcare professionals. There's all these people, who are out there supporting children, supporting families. And it makes sense to think about that these relationships aren't just with the children, right? So if the family caregivers and the helpers, they both build relationship with children, and then it makes sense that there's a genuine sense of a partnership between the helpers and the families, and in a way, right, through the interactions, to have a genuine kind of a relationship among them. And of course, families don't do this all by themselves. Families reach out to their own neighborhood and communities for support. There are people, from neighbors to friends, and to kinship. There's just, we hope to surround families with an informal network of support. And the same thing goes with helpers. Helpers, in the ideal world, doesn't have to do this alone. Helpers can reach out to a community of people who share their practice, who understand what is challenging about the practice, what is promising about the practice, and what is ultimately rewarding about the work that they are doing. And of course, in the end, children need their community of peers to be with, just like grown-ups need their own communities. And this little map or picture together is how we've always pictured what human relationships and interactions look like, surrounding children, their families, as well as those who help them. And to the extent that we can strengthen the relationships and the interactions on this little vision, then the whole system becomes healthy. Now, something obviously changed within the last year, as the pandemic comes around. Schools and childcare and libraries and all the places that we're accustomed to had to close down one way or the other. And few of the places have been able to fully reopen yet. And one of the questions I think many of us struggle with, as we try to think about the people that we're supporting, is, what has changed as a result of the pandemic, and what can still remain the same, or what is that we can do to make sure that some of the most important things that still remains the same. Early on during the pandemic, I think, I imagine that many of you had experiences with that too, that there were these just heartbreaking but touching stories about reaching out to each other through any creative means that you can find. I remember there was this picture that came out very early on, about a year ago, about a doctor, who's working in the hospital with COVID patients, and he had a young son who's just learning to crawl, and he couldn't come home, of course, so he would come to outside the screen door, and the little boy would just crawl towards him. That's how people find the these windows. Well, in this case, quite literally a window, to maintain their connection. Dana and I, right before COVID, we were out here in Massachusetts, working in a school district, working with the teachers and so on. And halfway through our work, of course, the school are shut down. So the workshop went from in person to into the Zoom window that we still have to this day. And what was so beautiful and lovely was that twice as many teachers came onto the Zoom than they were in person. One, because they can, but two, because they missed each other. They missed the children, of course, but they missed each other as well. So one of the things I was thinking about early on, as I was teaching in this room, I've been teaching from this room for my own students for over a year now. There was this old book that I had from Helen Keller, Helen Keller is, when she was young, she lost her sight and she couldn't speak, um, and her she couldn't hear, and it was through her work with her teacher, Anne Sullivan, who herself went through a deaf school, that Helen Keller eventually, become such an incredible writer as well as an advocate, for not just for children with disabilities, but for all human beings, for their potential to learn and grow. But anyway, in the 1950s, Helen Keller just published this book of ideas that she thought of, ideas that she liked, that she learned from other people. And on the very first page of the book was this quote: um, when one door of happiness closes, another opens, but often we look so long at the closed door, that we do not see the one which has been opened for us. And I thought, wow, what a powerful idea. Even as the doors closed for Helen Keller when she was young, but that she found, and she and Anne Sullivan found the windows that continue to open. And anyhow, that particular idea of open doors and closed windows just got stuck in my head in terms of, where can we set our eyes on, during this particularly difficult time.
This is a metaphor that I think has really been sound when we think about the last year. Um, for just a little bit of history, Junlei likes to share metaphors quite often with me. He speaks in metaphors quite often sometimes too. And this was one metaphor that immediately we both thought, yeah, this is very much the way we're looking at the world right now. Because when we think of all of the doors that were open, when we think back to the vision that Junlei showed at the beginning there, it seemed like so many doors were open. But when physical distancing kind of stopped um, those doors from being open, it was time for us to think a little bit about what windows could possibly be open, what else was closed, what else was open. And it actually made us both think about, um, you know, while the vision of that Jinlei showed before may look very different right now, it may look a little more disjointed, not quite as clean, and it might look like there aren't so many people connected as there were before. That even though there are doors that are closed and windows that are open, and we're looking for ways in, that while everything we're experiencing right now all at once seems very different, are we really in completely uncharted waters? Or have we somehow been in experiences before where we've had to look for new ways, look for more than just the way that we were typically used to doing things? So often when we think about the work of serving young children, and we think about going into a classroom or going into any setting with a specific plan of how we're going to make it from point A to point B, I've always thought of that service as a bit of a climbing a rock wall. That when we start at the beginning of the rock wall, we may be able to see where we're going. We may have a very clear path for what that seems to be. However, as we start to build, as we start to walk up that walk wall, we can see that, oh my, there's something in our path. Or maybe the foothold that we thought was going to be perfect for us isn't quite there. We have to adjust our way and continue to move forward. That's very much the work of serving young children. You might see a clear path, but inevitably something will alter that a bit. That we're constantly innovating and thinking about what it means to remain connected to our children, to continue to help them to learn and to grow. And that's what we'd like to share with you today is some of the things that we've learned about maintaining and building connections in the last year from our helpers and the work that they've done to continue to build and sustain and to grow relationships and connections, even in uncertain times, even in challenging times. even when it seems like all the doors are closed and we're searching for the windows in. One of the ideas from Fred Rogers that has guided much of our thinking over the last year across a number of areas is an idea taken from a speech that he gave in 1989 to the American Academy of Pediatrics, where he talked with a room full of pediatricians about what it means to be more than one thing. And he said to them that what's been important in my understanding of myself and others is the fact that each one of us is so much more than any one thing. A sick child is much more than his or her sickness. A person with a disability is much, much more than a handicap. A pediatrician is more than a medical doctor. You're much more than your job description, or your age, or your income, or your output. So when we think about what it means to be more than one thing, it's something that early educators have been doing for so long, but has certainly been highlighted in the last year. Junlei talked about being in the middle of a project in the state of Massachusetts where we suddenly had to switch our learning groups to be virtual. We were also in the middle of a project in Pennsylvania looking at family engagement. And family engagement is a tricky thing when families and providers and educators aren't together, then when they don't have their natural touch points. And what we saw through this was that our early educators found ways to be more than one thing when it came to serving children and young families. And what, it was amazing to see the switch that they made from the closed door of being together to the open Zoom window, that we were able to see tele-intervention come into play in early intervention settings where early interventionists were guiding families through books and through activities for speech therapy and physical therapy. And all of the intervention activities could continue in ways that truly embraced the open windows that were available to them. So as these videos came in, we realized that the interactions and the connections certainly didn't stop. And it's because those who work with young children, our early educators, are so much more than just one thing. So we'd like to show a brief video of what it looked like when an early interventionist here in Pennsylvania took to the Zoom window and found a new way when the doors were closed of being together to continue to connect and work with her families.
So is that typical that she's not initiating the steps on her own? You need to help her without stepping? Yeah. I think part of what's going on is, she's still really working hard to stand up. A baby. I know.
Sit down.
Baby.
Bend your knees. Sit down.
So all that up and down you do, sit to stand, is going to help build her leg strength. So give another try when you feel ready. Let's talk about it before you do it. So you're going to twist her upper body to the right, but you're really going to have to be thinking about her legs because her tendency is going to be to go back to that wide base of support instead of knees together.
Okay.
If she gets scared, bring her right back down to sit to the side to play because this is really foreign to her and we want it to be a happy place.
Where is your llama, llama, llama? Where is your llama, llama, llama?
Excellent.
Llama, llama.
Excellent.
Llama, llama. Want to sit?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yay! But that time she did that transition really nice.
You can see in the video that physical therapist was able to continue to work with the young child and her family, even when the door of how they would typically go about providing services was closed to them. So when you look at that video, and we can use the chat function, we're not an overly large group here, but we'd love to hear your thoughts too. that in that video, what supports do you see the early interventionist providing to the family? Just in those brief moments where you can see her working with mom and dad's behind the camera and the young child is working on her strength there. What do you notice that the early interventionist is providing? A
Christina
lot of
writes coaching,
encouragement.
directing. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, a lot of encouragement and support.
Yeah. And Ashley writes emotional support, patience, right? There's a lot of because the lag in the video, right? There's a lot of watching and waiting.
Specific directions,
Yeah.
partnership. Yes, absolutely. Communication,
And Colleen
celebration for both
writes,
mom and baby.
yes, yes. It's the same thing I'm reading now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, that reminder, I think, at the end there is so important because it's a true way of coaching, and it's something that when we talked with the early interventionists that they talked about, because they've been moving to this coaching model and this family coaching model for a few years now, and this forced them to go into true teaching coaching mode. And one of the things that you can see the physical therapist do there at the end is to say, here's what might happen. Here's why she might not be successful at first. And how do we continue to work through that? And it's something that very much is around that positive support and encouragement. Now, a lot of what you have mentioned here is very much in line with what it means to be an early interventionist. But we'd like to finish the story quickly and show what it looked like at the end of their intervention visit when they were wrapping up their time together. And let us know if you notice anything else that the interventionist is doing.
You guys, I just have to say again, you're doing a super job. I love to watch, the things that were a struggle for her and for all of us, me to try to describe it and you to figure out how to help her with it. Like those things from a week or 2 weeks ago are easy now.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's encouraging because, like we said before, we're kind of home to be able to do the things and we know that we're practicing. So it's like, okay, kind of seeing the fruits of our labor is nice.
Yeah, and you really, you're doing a great job, and I know, she's coming up on, she is a year now, but don't worry, she is going to catch up.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, oh my gosh, like when will she walk? When will she, because it's scary, as a parent. You're just like, okay, you're seeing kids on social media walking and all this stuff, but just bearing in mind that we're doing the best we can with what we have. So, and thanks so much for all your help with all of that.
You're welcome. She's going to keep coming along. So if people start asking questions, when they see she's a year old, oh, when's she going to walk? Why isn't she walking?
Yeah.
That's going to come down the road.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not worried.
Okay. Good.
All right.
That's good. If you're not worried, then we're not worried.
I am not worried.
Okay. That's
all right.
good.
So I'll see you next week at 11, our regular time. Is that good?
Great. Thanks so much.
All righty. Take care.
Say
bye-bye. Bye, Gordon.
Bye-bye.
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 Say bye-bye.
There we go. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Oh, yeah. Bye-bye.
Yay. So nice. All right. Have a good week.
So once again, we're seeing in the chat here the encouragement, the reinforcement, the progress, the celebration of both mom and child, security, that you can see that there's a true partnership here on the screen. She reassures mom that it's okay. She's going to get there. She's not worried. They're able to reflect on the work that they're doing. There's a true sense of connection there. And it's true that you can see the partnership. And I think somebody mentioned on here that mom's sigh of relief, Evanda, saying that you really like the way she praised mom, and mom's sigh of relief speaks volumes. And it certainly does, because now, on top of uncertainty of wanting to support their child, wondering if there will be a break in services, now they're seeing that they can continue to move forward. They can continue to use the windows that are available to them, and that the interventionist is, as Lisa said, making it easy for mom to respond, to share her feelings, to feel supported. And that's what it means for our early educators across early intervention, across childcare, across schooling, to be that more than one thing. Now, for Liz, who is a veteran physical therapist in this, we can go on and on about what makes her more than one thing. That she's not just a physical therapist, that she's there to provide that encouragement and support. And we see that in so many ways in this video, from the beginning when she's coaching and saying, this might happen, so let's make sure that we're ready for it, and empowering and encouraging the family to continue along this process, to the simple words of hopeful appreciation at the end to say, you're doing a great job, keep on going, we can do this together, to bring that partnership. And it's that more than one thing that keeps this going, because it's allowed Liz also to find more than one way to be helpful, to be of service to this family. And that's the first thing that we've learned across our time here, is that being more than just one thing and having more than just one way is so very important to maintaining those connections, to continuing to build those relationships and sustain those relationships across time. And it's something that we've learned in the last year, even more, is that our early educators are far more than one thing. And when it comes time for it, they are more and will always find more than one way to be helpful. So while that picture from the beginning seems to be a little bit broken now, that vision for our system is beginning to be rebuilt, may feel a little bit more like this, where our helpers are re-engaging with families, like what we just saw here with this early intervention visit, is that we can see that helpers are finding more than one way to continue to be helpful to families. But that will always think back still to that idea of being able to provide enough support, to be able to give enough of themselves. That it's never for our early educators about, will I support or won't I support? It's, when am I giving enough? I feel like I could always give more, and I'm always doing so much for families and children. But is what I'm doing truly making a difference? And I think that sigh of relief that we saw from mom there shows all of the appreciation for finding that more than one way to be of service to children and families, especially during this very difficult time. And it's something that we have seen and heard from our helpers over and over again over the last year, that they continue to find new ways to identify as far more than just one thing, and to find far more than just one way to be helpful.
I think, Dana, when we worked with helpers, across all these different settings, I think the question, am I enough? Have I done enough? Has been around long before the pandemic. Because in a way, all of us who are in the helping profession, unlike families, we can't be with the children or the families forever. So, if you're a teacher, they graduate and they move on. And I remember, I remember working with foster parents and orphanage caregivers. And when the children, are healthy and they're adopted, they don't know if they'll see the children again. So they used to wonder, like, if they've done enough for the children before they were adopted, to help them to have a strong start when the children start in new families. I think the more we had opportunities to learn from the helpers all around these different places, the more it seems to impress upon us this idea that the human relationships that helpers built with children and families, that is at the heart of what they provide, and that the simplest, most ordinary interactions day in and day out are the tiny little building blocks of these relationships, even if these relationships are from afar, even if these relationships are not intense, like every day, and so as I was reading everyone's comments and thoughts about the teleintervention you just showed earlier, I think about the encouragement, the sigh, the sense that there's a relationship where there's trust and care that's going in both directions, right? And so even though saying goodbye, signing off, summarizing the visit on that day seems such simple, ordinary things, but they become the building blocks of what makes these relationships matter. I wanted to share with everyone here that this was one of the many moments, Dana, you and I kind of saw when we were in the school, like, right as when we got cut off by COVID. And this school is here in Massachusetts. It's in a community that is exceedingly diverse in ethnicity and in country of origin, as well as in family income. And in the preschool classrooms, there are children quite practically coming from all over the world. So in one of the classrooms there, this was a sheet that was posted on the wall. I was just reading it. They had 18 students in pre-K, and the home language came from 10 different countries, or at least 10 different origins. So this is the kind of a classroom we were in, and I wanted to just share something that really kind of connected with Dana and I as we worked with the teachers, both in person and then afterwards over Zoom, just like this. This was a scene from this particular classroom between a pre-K teacher with a little boy. This was probably just 2 weeks before schools shut down. But before we play the video, I just wanted to ask you to think with us just two questions, right? So one is, as you watch the moment, if you could just imagine kind of what kind of developmental experiences is the student having in this interaction, or what opportunities does the student have to learn, to grow, in whatever directions that a young person could learn and grow. And then related to that is, what are some of the things that you notice that the teacher is doing to help to support the learning and the growing in that brief moment. So with that, I'm going to just take you to this classroom shortly before the pandemic began.
Home.
I went home.
All right, where's your home? Right here? Home. Okay, before I let you go, so this is you in the mirror. Do you see that? Okay, so you said this is you, that you drew you. I'm looking at your head. Right on the top of your head, you have this. What's this? What is that? Is that hair? I see hair on you. But the question is, what color is your hair? Okay. Okay. Let's see if the black matches. Can you put that to your head? Is that the color of your hair? All right, so let's make some hair on your head. All right. And then I'm looking at your head. You got your hair. This is your face.
It's brown.
What are these?
These are my eyes.
Okay, so how many eyes do you have?
2.
Okay, so I see you have one circle here, but you just said you have 2 eyes.
Got it.
Okay. What color are your eyes?
White.
And
Black.
we've got a black. How would you color that in your eyes?
Because I wanted to actually.
So can you color in your eyes?
Yeah, black.
So we're just going to come back to these few questions, and feel free to take a couple of minutes to just think about it and share whatever you feel like sharing. We're just thinking about 2 questions, right? 2 sides of the interaction. What kind of learning and growing, what kind of developmental experiences might the student be having in that interaction? And then on the other side, right, like what do you notice that the teacher is doing to support these developmental experiences? So Dana and I are just going to read all these as you're typing. Christina writes, the teacher was including the student in the process of adding details, and she loves the use of the mirror, right, so that the students can look and check and look and check. Yeah, observational drawing and details and looking at themselves in the mirror.
I love the teacher was helping the student problem solve rather than giving him all of the answers. And it goes along with the use of the mirror.
Yeah. The students are learning about his own body, own face, as well as becoming aware. And Ashley writes how they're engaging on each other's level, both physically, right, at the same eye level, as well as kind of just in terms of thinking, I think.
Absolutely. He's providing feedback while guiding the child to self-correct and check his work. And fostering language interactions by asking questions. Even an element in there where he kind of changes the wording of his question a little bit, trying to figure out what's on top of his head. Right? Scaffolds a little there.
Right. And Stacy writes, the teacher reinforces what the student sees in themselves and imagine the future. And there's clearly a sense of relationship between the teacher and the child, just the way that we saw between the teleinterventionist with the mom early on, even though all we see is just a few minutes of this.
Once again, encouragement is coming up. There's encouragement. Love the easygoing interactions. It's playful. Yes, there's a learning activity that's very much in the middle of a playful interaction.
Yeah. That's right. And mixed in there are things like math literacy, or being able to name things and details and so on. But it's not just those little skills all by themselves, right? It's all kind of integrated in this interaction. This is great. Thank you. We wish we were there in person, because we can all kind of talk about all of that together. And I know that I know, within the chat, each of you choose to write one thing, but I imagine that you see a lot more than any one particular thing that you are writing about. And when we worked with the teachers, not only in this school, but in the many schools we've been to across several countries, what we would do is something very similar to this. We would, ask everyone to sit down together and think about, these interactions that they have day in and day out, and ask them to talk about, what do they see in these moments, and what do they think is learning and growing. And regardless of the words that we use, I think over and over again we see in even the simplest interactions at least 4 different dimensions, or 4 different elements of what makes, a tiny little interaction kind of a building block for a genuine human relationship. One is, as many of you have mentioned, the idea of connection, how they just seem to be at ease with each other. They seem to be in tune with each other. They're hearing each other. They're seeing each other in that moment. There's reciprocity, or sometimes that might be called serve and return. But this idea that between the two of them, right, the interactions seem to flow back and forth and back and forth. My idea, your idea, your idea, my idea. It just goes back and forth. For a child in that classroom to be included in whatever activity it is. Dana, I know you have a much better way of describing inclusion in this context. Let me defer to you.
I think so often we think of inclusion as an opportunity to come together as a group. But I think in this situation, what we see as inclusion is that this young boy needed kind of the one-on-one attention to be supportive in his engagement in this activity. And I think it was mentioned very early on in the comments also about how the use of the mirror is actually works to include the child in the development of this project. And that's very much what we see here. So inclusion is a lot of things, of course, more than one thing. But in this sense, we see inclusion in a way of being supportive to the engagement of this boy within the activity that they have for the class.
That's right. And lastly, so many of you have mentioned in the chat about all the different ways that the child have an opportunity to grow. It's in how the child observes, how the child identifies, become aware of himself, his eye color, his hair color, maybe a little bit of math literacy. Maybe part of the growing is how to build a relationship with a teacher, how to go back and forth with a teacher. I mean, if we just made a list, right, like all of us can keep thinking of all these different opportunities to grow. And so all these together, right, makes up these simple, ordinary kind of building blocks of the teacher-child relationship, the parent-child relationship, or the professional and family relationship. Whatever it is, it's these elements kind of weaving together. For anyone who's interested, Dana and I and our colleagues, we developed some resources we call simple interactions, which includes a simple tool that help us to think about, talk about, and observe these kind of interactions. And so it's on a website we call Simple Interactions. It's a website that's designed and made available for public use. So everything on the website is free for anyone to to use and to play with and to see if it makes sense, in your own school and settings. But I think the second lesson that we keep hearing from the helpers all around the world, whether during the pandemic or before, and I'm sure it's going to be the case for many years afterwards, is that the power of the relationship that we built comes from these simple, ordinary moments of interaction. And that when it comes to the question that Dana was echoing early on, about helpers thinking, am I doing enough? Can I give enough? And this is something I know parents and teachers have all grappled with over the last year. I can only say that when things get tough in the development of a child or person, what we know from the research about resilience is that if you look across studies of human resilience across countries and cultural contexts and across age groups, as the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University kind of synthesizes, that the single most common finding across the studies was that children who end up doing well after experiencing adversity early on in life, they've had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, a caregiver, other adults, which includes teachers and coaches, and I know in Dana's work, the crossing guards on the street. So it comes down to something, I think, whether it's in research or in everyday experience, so that we sometimes may refer to as having at least one person, right? The importance of having that, and in all the different settings that we have gone through, we have seen that young children learn and grow even when they're struggling from the presence of these at least one person in their own lives. There's family child care providers who we worked with early on. There's the foster care families and rural teachers that we had a chance to learn from over the years who supports orphans. Dana, you want to share the other two?
Yeah, those are from infant toddler classrooms across the state of Georgia, actually, where you can see teachers and child care providers working with our youngest learners. So celebrating them, of course, in this week of the young child. And then Matthew, in the video we just watched, is a Head Start teacher. So we've seen across a number of settings what it looks like to be at least one, to have at least one. And it's something that we want to think about a little bit, because it's not saying that all you need is just one person and everything will be fine, but that it's very important, especially in these times of challenge, that being and having at least one really matters in the way that we move through challenges and uncertainties. And it's something that in that resilience literature that Junlei just mentioned is very often we think about that when we think of young children and we think of young people who are moving through adversity, that having at least one stable and committed relationship as a child, as a young person, can really make that difference in growing up. But it's not just for children that we need to have one person. And that's something else that I think we've learned over the last year, is that our helpers certainly need to have and be an at least one also. And so many of our helpers are that at least one for children and families and one another, but they need help too. That our helpers need to have at least one. Because it's when we think about what it means for young children to learn and to grow, and we're celebrating young children this week, we have to celebrate those who provide care to young children right alongside how we celebrate the young ones. That we won't make a lasting impact on children if we aren't thinking about the needs of our helpers, if we aren't thinking about the needs of the adults. That when we think of what children need to learn and grow, the relationships, the interactions that Junlei was just talking about, thinking through those 4 dimensions of interactions: connection, reciprocity, inclusion, opportunity to grow, that those don't stop being important when young children stop being young children. That as we learn and grow and get older and grow into grown-ups, those things are still important. And they should still be the foundation of the way that we engage with one another. That how do we support our helpers? Well, we can do for our helpers what we imagine the best helpers are doing for children and families. And when we think about that system that Junlei talked about earlier, that we reference that vision for care for children and families, and how the disruptions of the last year have certainly altered a little bit of what that system looks like. One thing that we've learned across our thinking in the last year and our working still with those who support young children, or early interventionists, or early care providers and educators, is that much of the year they've felt a bit like this as children have spent more time in the home. And one thing we've heard overwhelmingly across so many different places and systems, that our helpers are feeling pretty isolated, that they're feeling like they're out there trying to do it all alone because they've lost some of that direct, spontaneous, and casual support that they had from their peers. That when they were working from their homes to support others in their own homes, that they felt like they were doing that alone much of the time. And how do we build systems then that trust and support and respect all of the work that you've been doing over the last year? When we look at how the world kind of shut down for a bit, our helpers didn't stop. They kept on going. They found ways to open windows and climb through them to support others. They came together in new and innovative ways. And they started to rebuild this system among themselves. They took it upon themselves to build communities of support for one another, to test out ideas, to think innovatively about what possibly could happen next. That it's our helpers who continued to serve, who continued to come together. And that's something that certainly isn't new. It's something that we're so deeply grateful and appreciative of, especially in the last year. But our helpers have been coming together to support one another for as long as helping has been around. That when the colleagues come together, our helpers come together in a community, they're able to share practice. They're able to test ideas. They're able to share their successes and their challenges. And they're able to come together to advocate for what they need to continue to do the good work that they do. So as they continued along the road of helping, as you all have come together to continue to support families and children, it's been an opportunity then to reconnect and re-engage with families and to rebuild that community of support around families. So many of you have become what Fred Rogers would call the support that helps us to bend with the gusty winds, but not break. That you've been there to support families as they have reimagined what their communities of support could be during these times. That maybe your little blue heads have switched a bit to little orange heads to become those communities of support for families. And as we've continued to rebuild this system, then we've been able to re-engage again with our helpers, with our children, and having those direct connections as children have returned to our care, as it may look a little bit different, but we're still there to help and to support. And of course, our children are beginning to reimagine and rebuild their communities of peers as well. But something we've learned across this last year is that we have an opportunity now as supporters of those who work with young children to advocate that systems are built that better support and trust and respect the work of our helpers. Because when everything else seemed to be turned on its head, it was the helpers who kept on going, who found ways to reach out and be there for families and for children and for one another, while their lives were topsy-turvy as well. And while we look across this system and we think to all of the places within here that we may find ourselves, that maybe we are a blue head sometimes and an orange head other times, but what we can see is that across this entire system, when we're all working together, we all have our ripple that we can make. That we're maybe the center of a ripple that's touching another and offsetting many ripples across this entire system that gives us so much hope for what is happening now, what never ceased to happen in the lives of helpers, and what can be built upon for a better future, and one that truly respects and supports helpers for all of the work that they do. And that is probably one of the biggest lessons and the biggest things we've learned from helpers along this way is that while the collective storm that we are in is certainly new, and while we're in a storm, we may not all be in that same boat, but these aren't necessarily uncharted waters. That the outsides of childhood continue to change, the outsides of how we do our work continue to change, but our helpers are innovative, and we celebrate you not just this week, but every week, the work that you are able to do to continue to meet the needs of children, to continue to be their helpers in every single moment. Now, we don't have much time left together because we do want to be respectful of time to allow some time for reflection and questions. But we would like to end with a short message. So Junlei and I started our work together while we were a part of the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning in Children's Media, just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, Junlei has moved slightly north to Harvard and continues his work there. And I'm still at the Fred Rogers Center. But one of the great joys of our career is learning from Fred Rogers and how he applied so much of his understanding of child development, of listening and learning the needs of children and the needs of helpers, and putting that into practice through, of course, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but through his writing and his speech making, and so many efforts to increase understanding of children and childhood, and to increase support for those who continue to support and serve children and young people. So we have a message today for you directly from Fred Rogers himself. And when we think back to, are we in uncharted waters? Have we somehow been in times of collective uncertainty before? This message comes to us from a time when we were certainly going through a time that was a collective challenge for so many of us. This message was recorded on the 1-year anniversary of September 11th. So this was September of 2002 that Fred recorded this message in gratitude to all of the helpers who were continuing to support children through uncertain times. And we think it bears a repeat for what you all have been doing and the deep gratitude that we have for all of your work, of course, throughout the last year in times of uncertainty.
You know, it happens so often. I walk down the street and someone 20 or 30 or 40 years old will come up to me and say, You are Mr. Rogers, aren't you? And then they tell me about growing up with the neighborhood and how they're passing on to the children they know what they found to be important in our television work, like expressing their feelings through music and art and dance and sports and drama and computers and writing, and invariably we end our little time together with a hug. I'm just so proud of all of you who have grown up with us, and I know how tough it is some days to look with hope and confidence on the months and years ahead. But I would like to tell you what I often told you when you were much younger. I like you just the way you are. And what's more, I'm so grateful to you for helping the children in your life to know that you'll do everything you can to keep them safe and to help them express their feelings in ways that will bring healing in many different neighborhoods. It's such a good feeling to know that we're lifelong friends.
So, as we think just about what is it that we have before us in the process of rebuilding and reopening, welcome children and families back to all the places, we hope that we would have an opportunity to continue to learn from helpers everywhere and continue to appreciate the kind of relational work that all of the helpers are doing, no matter where they are in this beautiful kind of community of ripples, no matter who they serve. And that, once again, at the core of this work sits this question, which is how do we collectively, with one another, develop our practices and programs and policies in such a way that encourages, enriches, and empower the human interactions and the relationships all around us, and that in rebuilding back a much better system for children, for families, for helpers, that we can collectively focus on that question, and that together we can really continue to explore this idea that each of us brings more than our professional credentials to what is it that we do. And each of us, even in times like this, have found so many different ways to serve the other human beings that are around us. So with that, Dana and I would like to share our appreciation for all of you, and it's just a pleasure for us to be able to join you through this window, through this open window during the week of the young child. It's as much of a week to turn our focus to children as it is to turn our focus to all those who are supporting children and their families. So we'll stop here. We'd love to chat, and if you have any questions or comments to share, either in the chat window or just unmute, and we'd love to stick around.
Thank you all for this webinar. It was excellent. I'll talk to you all later, if possible.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye, guys.
Well, thank you for sharing that clip of Mr. Rogers. I feel like often this year I've just kind of longed for Mr. Rogers myself, that calming tone that he has. And I remember after 9/11, he was asked, to come out of retirement because his voice is so calming for students and adults alike. And I've thought of Mr. Rogers. I know that's odd to say this year, like, what would he be saying to help us all? So thank you for sharing that. It was a nice little welcome to end my evening for sure.
Thank you. I'm glad that that resonated with you. It certainly has been on our mind as well.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how many people have been longing for a little bit of Mr. Rogers this year. We've heard from quite a few families who have re-engaged with the program and many, many educators who are doing the same. So yes, that calm voice and gentleness is very much needed right now.
Well, I was just going to add, Dana, that as much as Mr. Rogers deeply appreciated the affections that people have for him as well as the program, he was the first one who always say, right, the people who can really help you are the people who know you, who live in your neighborhood and community. And so in that way, he didn't expect everyone else to sound and be like Mr. Rogers, but he looked up to the helpers in each neighborhood and community.
And I want to say that I actually almost tried to, I was going to do a screen snap of the one slide of where you were asking that. I think we need to ask ourselves that question about, what needs to be in place. Junlei, which the one where it's fill in the blank, that one is, I really think that we need to have further conversations and discuss this, because we as a professional development provider, we work with the teachers and the practitioners, those in early education and care. Yes, this is, I think it's something we really, really need to revisit. I mean, we always should be thinking about this, but even more so because we know right now in Illinois, some schools are going back after the spring break. That's kind of what's impacted some of our participation and things we're doing, is that all of a sudden they're going back to face-to-face classrooms. So I think this is something that I would encourage everyone who participated to think about. And I think we're going to do something around this, because I think it's important for us to share this, not only with our organization, but, it's a way to advocate with legislators and with policy makers and those people that really need to hear this message. So I think that's something I know that as an organization, we're going to pursue. I think it's really important, more so than ever. And Julie, there's Julie saying that she agrees, and everybody, I see they're nodding their heads. So it's a time, I really think more than ever, this is a time for us to reflect. Like you said, this wasn't really uncharted waters. Early childhood, I think that's the thing about early childhood care and education, is they have to be so flexible, so adapting, right? Everyone, it's like, you've got to be creative. You've got to, it's in the moment things that you're doing. So I think that's going to be an important thing going forward. I was just wondering, and I had a curiosity question too for either Dana or Junlei. As you show these videos, like, was it the teacher Matthew? Did you ever go back? Like, does he now go back and look at that? And does that reaffirm, is that one way that you also help to reaffirm the helpers in terms of actually showing them in their practice what they're doing? I was just curious about that, because I think I saw you, Dana, with the camera taking video of people. And so I'm curious about how, is that a way also to help them understand how important that is?
It certainly is. And it's meant to be a tool of reflection. So the simple interactions tool that Junlei talked about, we'll use that tool in a community of practice to talk about these moments. So we'll take real moments like what you just saw and use those as learning material. And we've been told before that it feels like a big group hug sometimes. And it's because it's that affirmation that is so important. So there's affirmation there, there's reflection, but it's coming from peers also. So when you sit within a community of peers and hear about what they're noticing on screen about your practice that is so strong and that is affirming, It is very uplifting, but it also then gives them a chance to wonder about that practice moving forward. So we practice that idea of noticing, and we notice around those 4 dimensions or what's happening in the video. And then also wonder maybe what comes next, or what that could look like in my practice. Maybe I don't do something that looks like that. I wonder what that could look like. I wonder who could be of support to me along that journey as we're a part of this community of practice. So yes, that all of the videos that we show, the people who are in them have seen them. They've been a part of reflective practice. They've been a part of sessions around simple interactions to think about what those moments look like in an effort to be intentional about growing moments like that too.
Great. Well, we really needed to hear your message today. I think everyone in the room would agree, right? I know it's a Zoom and it's not like we can be in the same physical space together, but I feel like we are in a space together, no matter if we're through, like you said, through this window or through other windows or doors. So we really appreciate. If anybody else has any questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself.
I just wanted to add that I think as many of our teachers and administrators are going back to in-person learning, they're feeling additional pressure, especially with children who they've been pretty disconnected with, and they're feeling a need to accelerate and to push harder and try to close gaps that do or don't exist. And I love your message of simple interactions and remembering to give it the patience and the time, because I'm not sure that the rest of the world is giving our teachers and our administrators that same permission to breathe and to match the pace that is really best, not only for the children, but for the adults. It's just been that kind of
for the adults too.
It was, for me, that's a really important administrative message to take away. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Kathleen, for sharing that. We agree that, you know, life abruptly stopped, and we shouldn't try to abruptly throw it back to where it was before. And you know, when we think of it in Fred Rogers terms, we like to think of it as taking our time. That we can take our time. That yes, there are a lot of pressures around us, but there's a lot of healing that must happen also in a lot of communities and a lot of places. And our children and young people especially have had their lives pretty much dictated to them over the last year and have lost a lot of agency in what happens next. So how do we make sure that they are seen and heard and appreciated, and that our educators are seen and heard and appreciated for their work as well? So Kathleen, I thank you so much for bringing that up.
Somebody just put something in the chat too that I want to see. Right, not resuming as if nothing has, nothing has changed, because it has. Does anyone else have any comments or?
So I was thinking about this as our schools have been open since last August for in-person learning, and I spent a good part of the summer just talking to teachers. So Kathy, just kind of echoing what you were saying. Yes, we have to be very cognizant of the children's feelings and the transition they're going to have to make. But to me, it was just as important to talk to the teachers, and I channeled my best Mr. Rogers in talking to them, and just kept reassuring them, because they were all like, this is not developmentally appropriate. And I kept saying, I know it's not developmentally appropriate, but school is the best place for the kids to be. And I just kept telling them, as long as you're okay, the children will be okay. And I kept thinking of that same quote about the helpers that Mr. Rogers talks about. So thank you so much. This was a really very powerful session.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. Dr. Taylor, I think in the beginning you said, you wondered what Mr. Rogers would think right now, what would he do? Now, granted, we lost Joanne Rogers in January, but something that, one of Junlei and I, anytime we would go to Joanne Rogers and say, well, what do you think Fred would do about this? She'd always give us that same answer, which was Fred would listen. Not only listen, but he'd listen first. And sometimes that listening goes a long, long way to meeting the needs of people who are feeling overly burdened and overly pressured to know that they're being heard. So really, thank you for listening.
Yeah, I was thinking about what Kathleen was saying earlier about not rushing, not feeling like we have to go back and hurry and get everything in, and that Sue was writing it. It's not about abruptly resuming as if nothing has happened. I just imagine that if teachers are given the space and the trust and the respect, I think so many teachers would go back and start with listening and asking the children, what have you been through? What have you been feeling? And what have you learned, right? There's so much talk about, what have you lost? But I imagine that children learn all sorts of things, just not the kind of things we always talk about in the classroom. I think, part of taking the time is listening, and part of helping teachers listen is to trust and create space for them, and not, pressure the teachers to pressure the children.
I'm just giving it some time here to see if anybody else. I know Susie has some. Actually, we have Susie, do you want to give everyone who's still in the room the surprise announcement of how we get to spend more time with Dana and Junlei this week? Because there's a surprise for those for you who have stuck it out with us to the very end of this webinar. Do you want to share that with everyone, Susie?
Yeah. So when we first met with them, we had asked if they would also be willing to share a daily message during this week. And so they have made some recordings, short recordings that we'll be sharing throughout the week, throughout our social media platforms. And we are so excited that they've done that, because just any small words of encouragement from them as well is so very helpful for everybody, the families, the children, the teachers, the community helpers, everybody who we are hoping will follow our links and watch on our social media and our website. So we're very excited that that is going to be coming up as well. So we're anxious. It's just wonderful. This has been so wonderful. We are so very grateful that both of you were able to share your messages today and your knowledge and encouragement. And I feel that you are correct. Everybody, I think most everybody has said that this is really just what we needed. I think it's very calming, very supportive, and I think everybody has definitely needed this. So we're very happy to have the two of you present for us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And please be sure to watch our website as well at eclearningil.org. And we have a link for some additional resources for the week. So it has the link to NACCE for their suggestions on Week of the Young Child this week. And then it also has some additional ideas and resources with some of our agency partners that we work with in early childhood. So don't forget to watch that as well.
So we can say that they can leave the webinar a few minutes early, and they can just make sure that make sure you give us good information on that evaluation form, thinking about what the message was today. Remember, he said we have to be mindful of, you know, what does it take? Fill in the blank. We want to get that information from you, and so we'll give you a few minutes early to leave the webinar, and take care of yourselves and do something for yourself in those few minutes, right, everyone?
Yes.
And thank you all for being the helpers out there that we work with all year long. And thanks, Dana. Thanks, Julie. We know we told them today that this is not the last time they will be hearing from us, that we will have them back. We will have them back. So anyway, thanks everyone. Have a great evening.
Have a great evening. And don't forget, celebrate the child within you.
That's right.
Yep.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.